So for more insight from Washington, we now welcome Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you, Jonathan, for your time on this day. So more than 150 leaders in New York right now. Over and above the speeches, much of the focus falling on meetings on the sidelines. Of course, this region is keenly watching that meeting between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid. Your thoughts about what's at stake for each leader right now, given the warming and changing ties?
Sure. Well, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is on a charm offensive, met with Jewish leaders in New York yesterday. I think there is an attempt to try to wield, at least in his mind, their influence in Washington to be able to pave the way for better relations between Turkey and the United States. I'm not sure whether they have the ability to do that, but I understand that the conversation yesterday was frank, that they were talking about the same concerns that I'm sure Prime Minister Lapid will raise with President Erdogan, and that is that Hamas, the terrorist group that is based in the Gaza Strip, still has dozens of operatives that are circulating in and around Istanbul. These are people with blood on their hands. These are people that raise money for Hamas. And in order for normalization to truly take hold, Turkey is going to have to make some tough decisions. They have been very strident about their support for the terrorist group in years past. Really, the last decade or more, we have seen this kind of activity. So I think it'll be very interesting to see whether Erdogan and his government begin to dial back on that Hamas presence.
Well, given that, what do you make of the security coordination we heard about in recent weeks between Israel and Turkey, foiled plots on Turkish soil? What more is known about that cooperation between the two in the fight against terror?
Sure. I think, as I understand it, speaking with folks in the U.S. intelligence community as well as in the Israeli intelligence community, ties are always actually quite good between these agencies. They really understand that they have no choice but to cooperate, given that they have enemies and threats that are they're truly the kinds of threats that can destabilize the region, if not these governments themselves. And so you have the MIT, the Turkish intelligence services, working with the Mossad to try to thwart the aspiring attacks of the IRGC from Iran, for example, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and others. So those sorts of things I think we can expect to continue, and the cooperation is still quite good. The question is, at a somewhat lower level, when we start looking at smaller groups like Hamas that only threaten Israel, will Turkey take the right steps? I am sure that the Mossad has shared information about those Hamas operatives. The question is whether the MIT wishes to act on them.
And Jonathan, we heard in recent hours Antonio Guterres mentioning a range of conflicts around the globe, also saying the prospects for peace between Israel and the Palestinians are ever more distant. His words, the Palestinian issue was a top priority for Erdogan. Is it less so now as these ties continue to warm between Turkey and Israel?
Well, I think that it'll be impossible for him to relinquish that as an issue. I think it's been a core talking point for him and his AK party, the Justice and Development Party in Turkey. That's part of how he rallies his base. So I don't think it's going to go away. But I think it may be similar to what we've seen in some of the Abraham Accords countries, Bahrain, UAE, and even to some extent Saudi Arabia, where we see countries that are, let's just say, adjusting their national priorities, that perhaps they haven't given up on the Palestinian cause, but that they understand that there are other core national interests that they're going to need to prioritize if the goal is stability and prosperity. And of course, that should be, I think, the goal of every country in the region. It isn't necessarily for countries like Iran, but for all of the other responsible stakeholders in the region. I think they're beginning to understand that the Palestinian issue, maybe it's still near and dear to their hearts as Muslims or as Arabs, but they cannot make that the dominant issue when there are so many other challenges that are at play. And this is, of course, what the Secretary General of the United Nations has highlighted, that there are multiple international challenges that really must be addressed. I think the Arab-Israeli one is probably fairly far down on the list when we consider the kinds of things that could destabilize the globe.
Well, we certainly appreciate your insight, and we will continue to bring those speeches out of the UN to our viewers here. Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, is live from Washington. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.